like and subscribe, and leave a comment below. Beyond Antarctica, Chapter 23. The oppressive darkness approached on all sides as Todd and Tony tried to make sense of their predicament. They had their weapons, a shotgun and a pistol, but in the face of a giant, these seemed almost laughable. Todd's fingers traced the cold metal of his shotgun. It was a small comfort in an otherwise dire situation. "This isn't good, Todd," Tony whispered. "What do we do now?" Todd took a deep breath. "First, we need to figure out what this giant wants with us. He hasn't harmed us yet, so maybe there's a chance we can reason with him," he said, as he pulled out the universal translator. Tony replied, "Reason with a giant? I don't know, Todd. But we can't just sit here and do nothing," Todd replied. Just then, the giant slid the bucket from left to right, and they had to brace themselves against the sides to avoid being tossed around like rag dolls. They could hear the giant speaking, his voice a deep rumble that vibrated through the bucket. The words were unintelligible, but the tone suggested he was not pleased. The universal translator beeped and said unintelligible language, and beeped again. They looked at each other in fear. If the translator is not working, they knew they were in true trouble. "We need to try and get his attention," Todd said. "If we can make him understand that we're not a threat, maybe he'll let us go." "How do we do that?" Tony asked. "Start by making noise," Todd replied. "Bang on the sides of the bucket. It might be risky, but we need to do something." Together, they began to pound on the walls, their fists creating a rhythmic thumping that echoed through the confined space. The bucket stopped swaying, and for a moment there was only silence. Then they heard the giant's voice bellow out, so loud it made the floor beneath their feet tremble. At that moment, the bucket was lifted, and they were thrown off balance by the light flooding in. As the giant tilted the bucket, they could see his enormous face peering down at them. Todd raised his arms in the air in a gesture of peace. "We mean you no harm," he shouted, hoping the giant would understand the intent behind his gestures and the kindness in his tone. The giant's eyes narrowed, and he made a guttural sound that resonated deep within his chest. He lowered the bucket to the ground, setting it down gently, as Todd and Tony exchanged a hopeful glance, but their hope was short-lived. Just then, the giant reached in and scooped them out with his massive hand, holding them up to his face for a closer inspection. They dangled helplessly, feeling like insects under his scrutiny. Todd's mind raced as he tried to think of a way to communicate. He pointed to himself and Tony, then mimed walking and pointed toward the door. The giant watched with a bemused expression, but it was unclear if he understood. "We need to find a way to show him we're not a threat," Tony whispered with his voice trembling. The giant carried them to a large table and set them down. They looked around, trying to take in their surroundings and find anything that might help them communicate. The table was cluttered with items that seemed ordinary but were of enormous proportions. Suddenly, the giant picked up a large glass bowl and placed it over them, trapping them once more. The glass walls distorted their view, making the outside world appear even more surreal. "This isn't good," Tony muttered with his breath fogging up the glass. Todd tried to stay calm. "We need to think. There has to be a way to get through to him." The giant loomed over them, watching their every move. "Maybe if we draw something," Todd suggested. He breathed on the glass, fogging it up once more, drawing on the foggy glass a map of the island. Then he began to sketch a crude map of their location. Then he pointed to the drawing and then to the giant, hoping he would understand. The giant peered at the drawing, with his brow furrowing in concentration. He made a sound that could have been a question or an acknowledgement. It was hard to tell. He reached down and gently lifted the bowl. "Show him the map," Todd urged Tony. "Maybe he can help us." Tony pulled out and held up the map, pointing to the map and the X and then to the direction of their ship. The giant studied it for a moment, then nodded slowly. He pointed to himself and then to the drawing, as if to say he understood. A glimmer of hope sparked in Todd's eyes. "I think he gets it. Maybe he can help us." The giant made a series of gestures, pointing to the map and then to a different part of the island. It was clear he was trying to communicate something important. Todd and Tony watched intently, trying to decipher his meaning. "It looks like he's showing us another part of the island," Tony said. Maybe there's something there we need to see. The giant carefully lifted them again and placed them on his shoulder. The sensation was dizzying, but they held on tight as he began to walk. The landscape below them passed by in a blur, and Todd couldn't help but marvel at the giant's immense stride and raw speed. As they traveled, Todd and Tony kept a close watch on their surroundings, noting landmarks and other details. The giant seemed to be taking them to a specific location. After what felt like an eternity, the giant stopped and gently set them down on the ground. They found themselves in front of a massive cave entrance. "I guess this is where he wants us to go," Tony said, eyeing the cave. Todd nodded. "Stay alert. We don't know what's inside." They entered the cave. The darkness was oppressive. The air was cool and damp, and the faint sound of dripping water added to the eerie atmosphere, but they moved forward. As they ventured deeper, they began to see faint glimmers of light. They followed the light, and soon they found themselves in a large chamber filled with glowing crystals. The crystals cast a soft, ethereal glow, illuminating the chamber and revealing a scene of breathtaking beauty. "This is incredible," Tony whispered. Todd nodded, but his mind was still focused on their mission. "Look around. There might be something here that can help us." They searched the chamber, examining the crystals and other objects scattered around. It was clear that this place held great significance, but they couldn't quite grasp its purpose. Suddenly, Todd noticed a small, ornate box tucked away in a corner. He approached it cautiously and opened it, revealing a collection of ancient scrolls. The scrolls were covered in intricate symbols and drawings, their meaning unclear. "These might be important," Todd said, showing the scrolls to Tony. "Let's take them with us." As they prepared to leave the chamber, they heard a low rumble coming from deeper within the cave. The ground shook slightly as they exchanged a worried glance. "We need to get out of here," Tony said with urgency in his voice. They hurried back towards the entrance, but the rumbling grew louder and the ground shook more violently. It was clear that something was happening and they had to move quickly. As they emerged from the cave, they were met by the giant who had been waiting for them. He looked relieved to see them, and he scooped them up, placing them on his shoulder, and Tony pointed to the map, and the giant started moving. Todd said, looking at Tony, "We need to get back to the ship and figure out what these scrolls mean." The journey back was a blur of motion and noise. The giant moved quickly as they struggled to hold on. The ground continued to shake, and the air was filled with the sound of distant thunder, with an impending storm on the approach. When they finally reached the edge of the cornfield, they saw their ship anchored off the coast. The giant set them down, and they pointed towards the ship, as if to say where they're from and need to go. "Thank you," Todd said, hoping the giant understood his gratitude. The giant nodded and turned to leave, with his massive form disappearing into the distance. Todd and Tony hurried towards the shore, eager to return to their crew and share their findings. As they boarded the ship, John and Bob were the first to approach. "What happened?" John asked. "Did you find anything?" Todd held up the scrolls. "We found these in a cave. They might be important." Bob took the scrolls. "These are incredible. We need to study them and figure out what they mean." As the crew gathered around, Todd and Tony recounted their adventure, describing the giant, the cave, and the scrolls. The atmosphere was charged with excitement, and they just knew that their discovery was just the beginning of a new and thrilling chapter in their journey. For the next several days, the crew worked tirelessly to decipher the scrolls. Kim took the lead in the effort. The scrolls were complex, filled with symbols and drawings that seemed to tell a story, but it was a puzzle that required patience and determination to solve. As they studied the scrolls, the crew couldn't shake the feeling that they had only scratched the surface of the mysteries that lay ahead. The giant had shown them a glimpse of something extraordinary, and they were eager to uncover the full truth. One evening, Kim gathered the crew on the deck. She held the scrolls in her hand, with a look of excitement in her eyes. "I think I've figured out part of the message," Kim said. "These scrolls tell the story of an ancient civilization that once thrived on these islands. They speak of great knowledge and powerful artifacts hidden away to protect them from invaders." The crew listened intently, with their curiosity piqued. "One of the scrolls mentions a key," Kim continued, a crystal key that can unlock the secrets of this civilization. It describes a location deep within the island, guarded by powerful forces. John nodded. We need to find this key. If it holds the secrets to the civilization's knowledge, it could be of great help to us in our travels and understanding what happened here. The crew exchanged a determined glance. They were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, driven by the thrill of discovery. The crew prepared for the expedition with renewed vigor. They gathered supplies, checked their equipment, and strategized their approach. The island held many dangers, but they were ready to face them head-on. As they set out at dawn, the air was filled with a sense of purpose and anticipation. They navigated through the familiar cornfield, crossed the stream, and ventured deeper into the island, guided by the clues in the scrolls. The journey was arduous, filled with obstacles and challenges. They encountered treacherous terrain, wild animals, and remnants of ancient traps designed to deter intruders. But they pressed on. After days of travel, they finally reached the location described in the scrolls. It was a hidden valley, surrounded by towering cliffs and lush vegetation. In the center of the valley stood a massive stone structure, covered in ancient carvings and symbols. "This must be it," John said, "the place where the key is hidden." They approached the structure cautiously. The air was thick with tension as they searched for an entrance. Finally, they found a hidden door, concealed by vines and moss. Todd pushed the door open, revealing a dark and narrow passage. They entered, with their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The walls were covered in carvings, depicting scenes of the ancient civilization and their great achievements. As they ventured deeper, they encountered more traps and obstacles, but their determination and teamwork saw them through. Finally, they reached a large chamber, filled with light from a glowing crystal at its center. In the center of the chamber stood a pedestal, and on it lay a beautifully crafted crystal key wrapped in a shimmering metal. The key seemed to pulse with energy, and they could feel its power resonating through the room. "This is it," John said. John carefully took the key, feeling its weight in his hands. With the key in hand, they made their way back to the surface, their excitement growing with each step. The island held many more secrets, and they were ready to uncover them one by one. The crew stood at the entrance of the hidden valley. It felt almost surreal to be holding such a powerful artifact, a tangible link to an ancient civilization, as they prepared for the next steps of their journey. "Where do we start?" Todd asked, with his eyes scanning the dense jungle that surrounded them. John turned the key over in his hands. "The scrolls mentioned a temple," he said, "a place where the key would reveal its true purpose. We need to find that temple," he declared. Kim nodded, consulting the ancient map they had been using. "According to the map, the temple should be located somewhere to the north of this valley. It's not far, but the terrain looks challenging." "We've faced worse," Tony said with a confident smile. "Let's get moving." They set off through the jungle, the path ahead obscured by thick undergrowth and towering trees. The air was heavy with humidity, and the sounds of wildlife echoed around them. As they set off through the jungle, each of their thoughts started to drift to the discoveries and mysteries yet to come. This is not goodbye, nor the end. Until the story continues, my friends. B.N.Rocker.